Good afternoon. I think we are all set. I would like to welcome the participants today to the launch event of the new Center for European Space Economy and Commerce. A warm welcome from Vienna, the beautiful city of Vienna, and home of the European Space Policy Institute, and soon also of the new center, ECSECO in short. A special welcome to our people and persons that could attend in person, and in particular our DG Director General of ESA Josef Aschbacher. Welcome, Josef. And Henriette with the Director General for Innovation Technology at the Austrian Federal Ministry for Climate Action, Environment, Energy, Mobility, Innovation and Technology. Space in context. Herzlich willkommen, Henriette. I'm also extremely happy to welcome the about 200 participants that we know are connected from within Europe and also outside Europe, from a diverse community, industry, government, academia, students, media. They are listening to the video streaming that we are conducting as we speak. And please stay online. We have a message at the end of the event for you for further engagement after the signature event that takes place at the end of the event. Before I hand over to the Director General, let me take the opportunity to also greet Jean-Jacques Tortora, who unfortunately cannot be with us today because he contracted COVID and he asked me to step in for him. And my name is Ludwig Mueller. I'm the incoming director of ESPI, and I will take up my duties shortly. I have the pleasure to work with the new center equally and to lead what is a wonderful, young, talented team in these corridors. I'm happy to be with you today, and to Jean-Jacques, j'espère que tu vas bien récupérer et très bientôt être de retour avec nous. All the best, Jean-Jacques. The program today, just a word on logistics. We start with 3 keynote speeches. They will give a perspective of ESA, Austrian government, and ESPI itself, followed by a panel discussion with representatives from industry, trade associations, academia, and finance. And we will conclude the program with the signature of a memorandum of understanding between ESPI and the new center, and with closing remarks at the very end. With this, dear Josef, I would like to hand over to you for your keynote, please. Thank you.
So thank you, Ludwig, and also very warm welcome from my side. Jean-Jacques, also all the best, and I hope you get on your feet very quickly. We need you, and you're doing such a wonderful work here on ESPI. But also, congratulations to Ludwig for taking up the job very soon and running this wonderful place here in Vienna, which is really doing fascinating work. Over lunch, we had some very good discussions on some of the highlights and some of the work ESPI is doing, and really looking forward to more to come and more activities. But today we talk about ECSECO, the European Center for Space Economy and Commerce, which we are launching today. As you know, we have been we have been agreeing by member states the adoption of ECSECO as a new center, and it will really be a very important step for us because commercialization, economic arguments and economic views of space are increasing drastically across the Atlantic, but also in Europe. And this is certainly something that is extremely important for me personally as Director General of ESA, but for all of us in Europe. And therefore, I so much look forward to this activity of the European Center for Space Economy and Commerce, which, in my opinion, will have a bright future, but also a great prospect and a very heavy agenda of work to undertake because there is really a lot to happen. So let me just say a couple of comments from my side, on the side of ESA. As you know, ECSECO was established by a charter by actually the Director General, but based on a document that was approved by the June Council by our member states. And today's signature is the starting point, is the kickoff the cooperation between ECSECO to be hosted here at ESPI for the future activities. As you know, ECSECO will foster the development of European space economy and will boost the commercialization of space activities in Europe, really in line with the Agenda 2025. I'm sure you are very familiar with this Agenda 2025, where commercialization is one of 5 priority domains next to EU-ESA relationship, safety and security, transforming ESA as an organization, addressing program challenges like launches and other domains, and commercialization is really a key priority and a key topic. And as you also know, I'm taking this extremely serious within the ESA context. I've created a new directorate for commercialization, industrial policy and procurement. Geraldine Nasher is the new director of this activity, and Luca Del Monte, whom I've seen before, is heading the department on commercialization, and this is really a new activity. You may say commercialization needs a bit more than a directorate, and I fully agree with that. We are having a very strong agenda on how and what we do on the whole commercialization aspect, and certainly the ECSECO establishment is one step, but is one of many activities that we are launching and we are initiating within ESA in this direction, and for me this is fundamental, and I don't need to explain to industry here or to the stakeholders here. If we are not putting a lot of emphasis on commercialization and the way how we address it, we will just lose out, and we'll make ourselves redundant or obsolete, and this is something in space which you don't like to be. Obsolescence, as you know, is something that is a very bad word in space, and therefore we really have to make sure that we are on top of it, and this ECSECO is a very important step. As you know, ECSECO will contribute to the commercialization by providing a European platform for interdisciplinary discussions and research on the space economy and commerce. And the center will feed reflections on informed decision-making in a number of domains. And let me just highlight some of them, but they are certainly not exclusive. First, we will really look into new approaches of public-private partnerships and what this means for Europe. Of course, we know PPP since decades, but we also know them from overseas. But Europe has first its own way of working, its own style, but it also needs its own way how a PPP is conducted. As I say, we are running PPPs particularly in telecommunication for many years, but now this is something that needs a much more fundamental, a much broader approach, and certainly I look forward to what comes out from ECSECO, because this is new input we need to make sure that our PPPs are set up in a very sustainable way. Of course, key domains I could think of are energy, transport, but there are many others, and I don't need to explain the importance of these domains because they are in everyone's mind. Another important point is commercial in-space servicing and preparation of the lunar economy. And lunar economy, of course, meaning that there are many facets that are coming up from space mining to transport to communication, navigation on and around the moon. And again, there we are also developing ESA programs to support that. And certainly ECSECO, for me, would also do one part of the work. In fact, over lunch, we had a short discussion on what ECSECO could do to define the economy and commerce aspects of future space stations. All of us, of course, realizing that the current space station will cease to exist by the end of the decade. There are several commercial proposals on the table, especially in the US. And my question is, what should Europe do? And this needs a big decision, but it also needs views on what is the economic viability and what can we gain or not gain from engaging in this domain. And certainly, again, I would hope that ECSECO will also help us answering some of these questions. Plus, we want to develop tools and expert frameworks for export regulations between Europe and the rest of the world, on tax incentives within Europe to facilitate exchanges and harmonized lunar resources mining regulations. These are all topics, as you perfectly know, are very important. Very important to say, and this was highlighted before, and that's why we are right here in ESPI, I do expect ECSECO to work very closely with ESPI, and I see a lot of synergy between ESPI and ECSECO, and certainly through the person of Ludwig coming up in the future as leading. We have had a short discussion of already what this could mean, and certainly extremely important. And I think the team here is very well geared to ensure these synergies between both entities. So the first step will be to build around ECSECO a very strong community of European professionals interested in the development of the space economy and commerce. The members will be professionals from the public and the private sector, as well as academia. And they will include economists, engineers, scientists, lawyers, providing all kinds of perspectives and capacities. On top, all European citizens can join ECSECO, and that is quite unique. And also look a bit into the camera of the remotely connected people. This is something unique, and I really look forward to that, because this is something where we really hope to develop a new ecosystem and a very vibrant community which fosters the European collaboration towards the further development of the space sector, which is really a very fine example of including society as a whole in a collective effort to push space commercialization. The members will participate in and benefit from numerous activities of ECSECO, and let me just mention a few examples, certainly conferences and workshops, networking sessions, working groups, collaborative research, competitions for students, and studies and recommendations that are being elaborated for policymakers, decision makers, and individuals interested in what comes next. So personally, I really look forward to a large community of members that will actively participate in the center's activities. The first General Assembly, I was just learning, which will gather the members, will take place in November this year, and will address some of the topics mentioned before. ECSECO is located here in Vienna, is hosted by ESPI, and will enhance the successful work of ESPI, which already has produced many excellent results. And once more, thank you also to Jean-Jacques for delivering a good portion of them. I recognize some of the work which really has helped us a lot, also myself as DG of ESA last year in establishing the group of wise people and the recommendations coming out to develop and initiate accelerators and inspirators. And here also the office in ESPI have played an incredibly important role. And to create further synergies and foster the space reputation of Vienna and Austria at large as a hub and as a center of space in Europe. With this, I'd like to thank you, and I wish ECSECO a prosperous future. Thank you very much.
So, ladies and gentlemen, to basically advertise for Vienna's space reputation, here you've got me now. I'm really honored to have been invited to give a speech at the launch event of the European Center for Space Economy and Commerce. My name is Henriette Spyra. I'm the Director General at a ministry with a very long name. It has already been mentioned. It's the Ministry for Climate Action, Environment, Energy, Mobility, Innovation, and Technology. Ludwig just called it space in context. But it's really important to think about space in context when you actually want to make an initiative like the one we are launching today successful. So it's not so bad after all. Comes as no surprise that we are indeed very, very happy to have ESA launch this new initiative here in Vienna. We strongly believe that Vienna is an ideal location for an initiative like this. Next to ESPI, of course, we're here today, and also my very best wishes to Jean-Jacques Tortora. I hope you can at least join us virtually today. We, of course, have UNOSA in Vienna, and I think ECSECO will probably benefit from the close vicinity to both these institutions, and again strengthen the space hub we already have in Vienna. The mission of ECSECO was mentioned, and Josef also just talked about one very important element, the participation. And that's also a very important element we took great care in including in our new Austrian space strategy 2030, where we took great care to include all elements you count to a sustainable space strategy. So it's about environmental sustainability, about social sustainability, and This is our main reason for being here today, economic sustainability. Our aim is for the Austrian space sector, and we do have proponents of this here today, to support a green and digital transformation, both in space, but also on Earth. Furthermore, one of the aims is fostering a highly innovative and competitive space sector, taking into account the strength of the about 200 Austrian companies and research institutions we have. This not only strengthens Austria as a business location and attracts investment, but it also creates highly qualified jobs. And the same, of course, can be said for all ESA member states who will be meeting in Vienna these days. Their interests for their respective space industries most probably are identical, or at least very similar to the ones set out in our own Austrian space strategy. When it comes to the space sector, we Europeans tend to look across the pond to the US in order to compare us with what the US is doing. They spend more money in space, and sometimes they have simpler administrative procedures, and especially due to a big defense sector, the US has got very, very big players able to supply and compete in the space sector. And this weekend, we heard NASA saying, okay, let's all look together across the pond to what China is doing, a relatively new player. Compared to that, as many of you know, to put it politely, the European approach is a bit more cumbersome, more complicated. Not only do we invest less in space and have a smaller defense sector, we also split up these smaller spendings by having space activities organized partly by the different European states, the European Commission, and by ESA. This, of course, makes a strong coordination between all the different players a necessity. However, and I'm not only saying this as a political comment to what's happening in the US right now, however, these seemingly big disadvantages also hold advantages. It leads to a more diverse spectrum of small to medium-sized companies working in the area of space, often hidden gems to the public and world market leaders with the products and services they deliver. I strongly believe that the creativity of the many can hold up to the dominance of the few. But the success of this path requires hard work, so I thank Josef and Ludwig, who are here amongst many industry players, for their hard work. I mentioned the necessity for strong coordination. This does not only hold true for the players directly investing in space, as especially is the case with ESA, but also for the administrative settings. For this reason, I believe it truly can be said that Europe has been waiting for a center like the European Center for Space, Economy and Commerce, and is in dire need for its outputs. We want healthy companies able to deliver cutting-edge technology. In order to enable this, the public sector requires advice from experts in the field of space technology, as well as the European space industry as a whole. ECSECO can fill this role and optimize the efforts of the European stakeholders in space in order to get the most out of our investments in space. The mission set for ECSECO is not an easy one, but I believe one that, when followed consistently, can lead to a positive and lasting impact for all players involved in the space sector. Let me end by mentioning an article I read this weekend about how today's young people, but also many of us here, suffer a bit from a lot of the dystopic visions we have of our future. All of Europe's engagement in space comes from an area where we had a lot of utopias, and I really hope that a center like ECSECO can kind of give us some utopias back in a world of sometimes dystopic visions. I want to conclude my speech by thanking ESA and its Director General Josef Aschbacher for his initiative to establish ECSECO, and wish ECSECO a good start. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Josef, and thank you, Henriette. And thank you for the confidence you place in ESPI for hosting and supporting the new center. I would like to give a bit of a perspective on ESPI on what may lay ahead of us. and maybe take a quick step back before going into some specifics. We are launching the center at a unique period in the still young history of space. Austria, 35 years, that is young. We are at an inflection point, indeed, where commercialization in a future $1 trillion market opportunity takes center stage, where space may soon account for 1% of GDP and maybe more. And this is a complete new era of space, maybe only comparable, also for different reasons, to the 60s. We do this at a time when private investment, and we have panelists here that can give us their perspective on it, they are exceeding investments of 10 billion, private investment of $10 billion a year, and this is growing. At a time when the entry ticket to become a space actor as a nation or as an industry is decreasing significantly, and today satellites cost a fraction of what they used to cost, the same for launches if you compute per kilogram. Dramatic changes in terms of accessibility, affordability for many. We are also at a time where the industries and economy outside the traditional space sector discover the benefits of space for transport and energy and agriculture and health and security and many more. And they start investing. They're beneficiaries and they become investors. And maybe this is what we refer to, Henriette, space in context. I think your ministry is a perfect example of trying to bring solutions into where the solutions can serve a purpose. Personally, I'm a deep believer that this, what I call verticalization, is a prerequisite for space to step out of its niche. I have a favorite quote of last year, I think it was in Austria. Somebody who said space in itself does not tick the box, it's about the purpose. The value proposition required for a market to pay, to invest and trade, for society to accept and take full benefit of what space can bring. I believe this holds the key for fully developing a strong, sustainable European internal market, which is a key prerequisite for competitive Europe in a global commerce. And sustainability, again, Henriette, you pointed out perfectly well. This is also about economical sustainability, that we have an industry that can walk on their feet. There will be public support, but the sustainability can only be in the partnerships that also Josef referred to. But we are also at a time where space commercialization outpaces governance. These things happen so quick with so many new players and forces that they really happen at a speed that outpaces governance and regulations. We are at a time where the future might soon be in the hands of titans, or it might be dominated by national security constraints where you have world regions that have significant investments also and a basis for technologies in space. So cooperation and collaboration more than ever are required to provide us in Europe and our partners and competitors worldwide with an accessible, self-sustaining space economy and commerce scenario. This has never been so much on top of the agenda as today in many domains, and now we're used to it in a more institutional setting, and we will see it in commercialization. It is a necessary step. In this, where can ECSECO contribute? Certainly how private and public funding might best complement each other, where, for instance, patient capital is needed for longer-term technology developments, or where commitment from the public hand, public demand, may help investors' confidence to go into markets. And we believe ECSECO can contribute to this and help. It can help how public support can help commercialization without distorting the market. We are at a time where we have largely institutional programs, and we are at a time when we will see an increasing emphasis on partnerships with other investors, and we cannot do this with distortion of the market. Equally, how the increasing congestion of Earth orbits can be tackled to provide a safe environment into which private capital is ready to invest, to make sure that these investments in infrastructures and the services they are attached to, they are in fact protected. And regulation is an issue, certainly, but we also need to be careful and develop best practices in implementation to have solutions timely in front of us. And last but not least, how emerging exploitation of space resources can be addressed, for instance, to agree at European level what should be conditions for granting access to space resources to commercial operators. In perspective and beyond these immediate points in which we certainly can see the center be active, maybe a wider context, we know that in the US, they have fostered the role of the Office for Space Commerce as part of the federal administration. It may be premature today for Europe to create what might become a European version of such an office. However, it might become relevant in the medium term, and ECSECO may contribute to paving the way for this if this is desired. Now, in order to achieve these objectives of ECSECO, we believe that it shall work, and I think this is what we all agree already, with a hub of space economy and commerce stakeholders, and this is really where ESPI can support in various ways. The multidisciplinarity of the approach, and we see the panel today here as an example, with representatives of private, public, industry operators, academia, investors, Office of Economic Affairs, and others, to bring this ecosystem together, to create this ecosystem. And today is the first step into this. And for those connected to us, this is really something we want to grow and be inclusive for the wider audience. Equally, defining space economy metrics relevant for Europe, based on recent work, for instance, that EOCD is conducting, another domain where ECSECO can support. Highlighting global space economy trends, joint activities with members, to propose strategic insights on specific topics. And this is really something that is close to what defines ESPI as an independent think tank. And we are happy to also contribute to the domain and the topics that lay at hand in commercialization, space economy, and commerce. And last but not least, never to be forgotten, young talent, attracting young talent, the people we need today and tomorrow. I think ESPI is an example of this. I think the community we want to create here is one. This is something we want to grow. Let me close with a quote I took from our American friends. And I see that, again, Henriette touches upon the point in a nice way. Our best years are ahead of us, and we are innovators and creators. And then I would add, we should also dare to create utopia. With this, I'm happy to introduce our honorable guests from industry, academia, finance, who will join us in shaping these years to come, and who agreed to be with us here today in this beautiful city, home of ESPI, and soon, or by now, also of ECSECO. Thank you. I will stay here for a moment. I changed my head, and I will introduce the panel very quickly before I will moderate the panel. I'm happy to welcome Lynn Sönen from Alpine Space, representing or bringing the investor's perspective to the table. Professor Vito Albino from Bella Italia, benvenuti, representing the academic angle. Mr. Olivier Lemaitre, manufacturer's perspective, industrial angle. Monsieur Marc Tontriot, representing Earth observation angle. And I know you also have a telecommunications background. We talked about it. It will be interesting to see the multidisciplinarity. Mr. Christian Fidi willkommen. Very interesting because working across different verticals in automotive, mobility, railways, energy, another example where also in industry people work across the system. And who's not with us today here is OneWeb, but they were so kind, they were called into an important meeting on the governmental side today, but they were so kind and provided an input, which I will read on their behalf as we will work on the panel. And with this, I will change my seat. Thank you. Voilà. So I think we jump directly into the discussion, and I would like to raise 2 points. One, to each of you, a question as regards to what are the topics that today are the most relevant, what are the hot topics in space economy and commerce that we should consider. So this is not related to where we sit today. We'll have a second round on the question where you think specifically the new center may help in these challenges. And because we only have one lady today, and we will improve this in the future, certainly we will. I'm happy, Lynn, that you could make it. And I would give you the floor first for the first question, please.
Excellent, thank you very much. So I think I would very much like to start with a more particular focus on hot topics in the European new space industry, because that's what we focus on. So maybe just to give a brief explanation of why our fund, Alpine Space Ventures, invests into Europe and not the US. So our fund is led by 3 key, or let's say former key executives of SpaceX. So first, Bülent Altan, the former chief engineer of the Starlink constellation and VP avionics, Hans Königsmann, former chief engineer at SpaceX, and also Katrina Chambers, who was leading their avionics department for about 16 years there. So what they have in common is that they saw what an impact a commercial company can have and how it can entirely change an industry by just doing things in a dramatically different way. But the second thing that they have in common is that all 3 are actually European. So they wanted to support European startups in the way that they did, but on the other side of the pond. In addition, there's many reasons why we invest in Europe. First of all, we see an increasing number of really interesting companies in Europe. Our companies have access to a global talent pool. There is no such restriction as ITER in Europe. There is a lot of knowledge in the automotive, and you will tell us much more about this, and also in the electronics industry in Europe. And I think that space in general is just too much of an important topic to outsource it to the US. And this is something that European governments over the past couple of years have recognized more and more. And we're really happy to see that there's a lot of governmental support for space in general. When we talk about governmental support for commercial new space, I think that one of the most important, let's say, projects that Europe has initiated or launched is the Secure Connectivity Initiative. And I think that this is really a key opportunity for Europe to have or secure continuous autonomous access to critical space infrastructure. We have seen with the Ukrainian crisis to what extent it is important that we have our own mega constellation. And I think that this will create a lot of business, not just for industry incumbents, but also there is a big role for startups. Still, I think that ambitious projects like those that are very capital intense, they always require also public funding and public support. And when talking about funding, maybe one challenge that I would like to mention here is funding itself. So I think that with the current economic situation, it will be tougher for companies, especially when they look for growth capital, to get access to capital. At the same time, we also, I mean, I don't like to be overly pessimistic. So I think that very much we're in an economic cycle, and there is still a lot of money in the markets. But I still think that companies need to anticipate, and they need to adapt their financial plans in order to anticipate. And then one additional thing where I think that Europe can do better, and which is a huge opportunity for Europe in that sense, is that I think that we need to become better at sales. Because every time, and I don't like this US-European comparison, but I have to be very honest about that. Whenever we look into a particular vertical, we always also look at the other side of the pond and look at what the US competition is doing. And very often or rather Katrina, she sees that the technology from the European companies, that the technology is actually better. But they always beat us on how they sell things. So I think that Europe really has lots of great projects, great technologies, great entrepreneurs, but we need to be more proud of what we do and sell it in a more convincing way.
Thank you very much. So we need to better sell. We need access to capital, and we need to be better sellers. You mentioned verticals, indeed. I would like to pass the floor on to Mr. Professor Albino to give maybe a perspective on the economic side of things, please.
Okay, thank you, Mr. Mueller. I wish to start my talk about hot topics in space economy and commercialization, talking about a new industrial strategy for Europe that has been presented by European Commission, because on March 2020 and then updated on May 2021, the European Commission presented an industrial strategy that was dealing with the twin transitions, the green and digital transition, and then they updated later on the aspect of resiliency of the economic systems. Well, starting from that perspective, and looking at the idea of industrial ecosystem. So they created a kind of large analysis of value chains in terms of all actors belonging to the sector, to the industrial ecosystem, and to the sectors related to the industrial ecosystem. They recognized 14 industrial ecosystems. One of these is aerospace and defense. So if we look at the picture, the last picture that we have, that is related to data about May 2022. So the aerospace and defense ecosystem is basically characterized by 250 billions of euros of gross value added, more than 3.5 million of employees, and 250,000 firms. But if we look at the ranking, it's 11 or 12, depending on the parameters, compared with the other ecosystems. So my idea is that we have two kind of drivers for the growth of the aerospace, or a subset of space industrial ecosystem in Europe. And one driver is to connect the space ecosystem with the other industrial ecosystem. So space with no space actors, because this is a strong boost for the growth of the space ecosystem, as well as to progress in the scientific frontier. So we're talking about low Earth orbit, cislunar domain, Mars, space exploration. So these are the two powerful drivers for the growth of the space and commerce in Europe. I want to add something about what is happening in outside Europe, because I think it's important to have a clear understanding on the context. I want just to mention what preparing for this panel, I read about China Space Administration is doing something very interesting in terms of the China space industry, as well as China space standards. So they are working direction how to build an international community around their standards. So the idea of the China Space Administration is to create a large community, large international community around this. And then I think that another hot topic for space economy and commercialization should be the institutionalization in terms of creation of new organization, new market, new companies, a new model for public-private partnerships, and so on. I think that this is true if we look at the history of humankind. Anytime we had some space to explore and to exploit, we use institutionalization as a way to perform better, in particular to reduce, to increase the propensity to risk and to reduce risk adversity. So institutions like ECSECO too, institutions are important for the development of an industrial sector or industrial ecosystem. I want to add something also related to the role of state, because as Professor Mazzucato said, entrepreneurial state is important, but I think that the regulatory state is another issue that we have to focus very carefully, because regulatory state can have its different meanings. So it depends on how we interpret the role of state in the regulation. Not too much, of course, because you can slow down the growth, but anyway, it is important. Just few other issues. One is related to space-based services that has been mentioned. Okay, they are very important because they are able to connect non-space sector with space sector, and then it's not only a technological or commercial relationship, it is a knowledge relationship that is important in order to understand what is the direction for the business. And I want to say something about also the verticalization. Has been mentioned, verticalization. But basically, space is becoming a digital infrastructure, if we look from this point of view, from this perspective. And then all sectors that are not space-based are interested to verticalize their business and then to integrate digital infrastructure. This is true for transportation, but it should be true also for other sectors. So we have to, again, regulate the exploitation of this asset. Otherwise, we can have trouble, because what we expect is that we should have a clear situation in terms of investment and in terms of exploitation of assets.
Thank you very much. So I retain that you also mentioned the models of partnerships, Chinese and the role of industry. Space as a digital infrastructure, indeed, when the boundary between space and ground and services basically vanishes, and to connect to the non-space sector. I think this is a recurrent topic we see. I would like to now go to the manufacturing view of things with Mr. Olivier Lemaitre. Please, the floor is yours.
Thank you, Ludwig. Thank you very much for welcoming me here today. To put things a bit in perspective, and perhaps I hope also the rest of the discussion, let me just remind a few figures, and I promise I won't be long. During the last 5 years, when on average the US were launching 15 institutional launches per year, China was launching 25 institutional launches per year, and Europe was launching 3 institutional launches per year. This has to be kept in mind. What also has to be kept in mind is that European institutional budgets are 6 to 7 times lower than comparable budget in the US. So every year, we, as a space sector, we receive or we have 6 to 7 times less investment in space than in the US. Nevertheless, we are doing quite good if we compare, and the reason today why all European institutional actors have access to basically the full range of capabilities in space while paying, sorry to say, while paying so little, is because industry is competitive enough to win contracts on the very small, by the way, open markets. So every year we contribute for 1.5 billion of euro in net to the European commercial balance. Therefore, if we want to maintain this system sustainable, a strong and efficient support to R&D, research and development for competitiveness is key, and there is ample room for progress here, I can tell you. Budgets in Europe, institutional budget, even low, are growing, which is a good news, but not everything is bright. The level of nationalism, I would say, that we observe in Europe is growing, with several actors focusing nearly exclusively on the quick industrial return, even when they are talking about European in the sense of EU space program. So there is still this very strong focus on very quick industrial return at member state level, including also amongst member states that have already a well-established industry. And I'm not entirely sure that having a competition for leadership at sub-regional level will help Europe to become a space power or to make its space economy grow. In addition to that, we must also note that not everybody is convinced that investment need to grow in Europe, and that our market need to be better protected. We have seen with the legislative process around the EU space program several and strong attempts to undermine the legal measure proposed by the Commission to improve European non-dependency. And clearly, I mean, it's not a criticism, it's a fact. We have a few member states in Europe that have a little interest in the independence of Europe and for a role for Europe as a political power at global level. And this goes hand in hand. You are not becoming a space power if you do not project yourself as a political power. Then we have, and we have already addressed this today, we have new procurement approaches. From the acquisition of infrastructure, there is this trend from acquisition of infrastructure towards the acquisition of services. So we hear this is a tendency. We are not there yet, but there are at least attempts and ambition. But it's not only by trying new procurement approach that, or not even by increasing private investment, that we will create in Europe European SpaceX, which is basically kind of a dream of uninformed decision maker. First of all, I doubt that creating a European SpaceX is really something desirable, but also this shift of commercialization, I mean, the acquisition of services and private investment, somehow it also blinds us today about real success happening today here in companies that have a growth rate that is really impressive and growing perhaps faster than SpaceX is growing. even though at a lower scale. And perhaps third, neither the private investment nor new procurement approach will actually replace the paucity of public investment and public procurement and the lack of an European industrial policy. We don't have a European space industrial policy today. And perhaps to conclude, if I'm not too long, clearly space everywhere in the world is a tool for sovereignty, and it requires a strong coordinated public action based on an independent capacity to access space, to develop and exploit space-based capabilities, and to operate space system, and meaning that there will be no space economy without an EU role in space traffic management, which is honestly the next big thing. If we are out of the game, if we are not independent in our capacity to manage space traffic, there will be no space economy in Europe. And there will be no space economy in Europe if we do not have an EU space industrial policy that, of course, starts with reliable access to space. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Very interesting and good elements for food for thought. Clearly, you underlined, I think we know it, is the large gap between institutional support in other world regions and what we have in Europe. You've said factor 6, 7. You can translate it into number of institutional launchers, indeed. You were very clear that advocating for R&D and support to competitive industries, so really pushing innovation and help industries, and there are agencies in Europe that can help. It is clear. You also made an interesting point, competition not on sub-regional level, but on European level, Europe as a whole. Yeah. European autonomy, new approaches to services. I think the approaches to services at a time when we talk about security of supply chain, to know what infrastructures and technologies are needed to provide a service. I think this is something that we probably will have to look into, because if you just bought services, you will be dependent on what is inside the infrastructure. So you cannot really dissociate the two, certainly less so today than maybe some time back. Very, very good points. I would like to move on to Mr. Tontriot to give us a bit more to go out of the ring, if you want, from the manufacturing to the applications and what we can do with the systems and Earth observation, and maybe you have a word on telecom. Thank you.
Thank you, and thank you very much for inviting me to this roundtable. So I will, as you said, speak for what concerns the European Earth observation downstream industry, even if, as you recalled, I started my career, my too long career, in the space telecom business for about 15 years, but then 20 years in Earth observation, so that makes the equilibrium. Just to try to answer the questions about hot topic for Earth observation downstream, I would recall just the changes that Earth observation in general, and more specifically the downstream services, have been known in the last decade. Just to recall, before, more than a decade, before 2000, 2005, most of the applications of Earth observation was indeed for defense, security, and scientific world. And the real applications, be it commercial or institutional, started indeed just in 2000 or something like that. And since that time, there has been an explosion of applications on the commercial business with oil and gas sectors, with agriculture, with civil engineering, and other more than also on the institutional one. I will talk on that afterward. Why that? Because of the technology, definitely. There have been more and more Earth observation satellites with more and more accuracy in terms of images. And furthermore, images less and less expensive. So that creates a favorable environment. Let's recall as well the enormous increase of the HPC, the high power computer capacities, which make possible to use artificial intelligence algorithms, which are not new. They were known several 10 years ago, but thanks to this HPC power, we have been able to use these algorithms for analytics and merging different sources of data. So that's on the offer side. On the demand side, as I said, so we have started to see real added value applications in the commercial business, but in addition to that, there has been also recently, meaning in the last 5 years, a strong increase of needs related to the climate change impact monitoring and support to adaptation actions. A lot of these needs can be supported by new Earth observation-based solutions. That has created, of course, a significant growth, generally speaking, in the Earth observation downstream business, which reached about 1.7 billion euros in 2020, as reflected in the last industry survey made by ERSC. On the other side, of course, that created an appeal from the investment bodies. And just to give some figures, by the way, coming from the excellent report made by ESPI, in 2021, I read that the total investment made in European industry, space industry, amounted to 611 million euros, without taking into account the OneWeb investment. So in total, it's about 2 billion euros, which is quite significant, and even more if we compare that to the situation in 2014, where we were talking about 50 million euros. So we see here the trend, which is quite significant. But despite of that, even if 2 billion euros of investment is a lot for European space industry, we have to compare it to the 9 billion euros of investment made in the US space industry. So we are still a step behind. And just to try to answer to the topics I see personally and on behalf of ERSC, which I represent here, I see two key hot topics for the next future. The first one is, as I said, how to transform the needs into real demand, how to monetize the demand on the market, and more specifically for all applications related to the European Green Deal challenges, for which we are convinced that Earth observation can bring a significant asset. And I agree with what you have said. For that, we need also more salespeople, sales strengths, and also perhaps change in mindset in the European downstream industry. And the second challenge is, as far as I can see it, is how to cleverly manage these investment strengths which are coming into the European space sector. Of course, attracting investment is definitely positive, but we know as well that it can create some threat in terms of autonomy, independency, access to the data, and we have, of course, it's also our duty to preserve, as you said, the use of the institutional assets that have been developed in the past year, thanks to the huge effort made by the institutional bodies as well, be it at the European Commission or at ESA level. So, which means that we have to be very happy to attract huge investment, but we have also commonly, and here it's really a common interest of, for the institutional bodies and for the European industry to see how these investment capacities can be cleverly used for the benefits of European bodies.
Thank you very much. A clear message on what you call monetized demand, Green Deal, climate change, on a market which today comparatively is still small, if you look into other parts of the space economy. It's certainly a domain that is an enormous growth, and one would think probably any business development person in industry could identify Green Deal, climate change, counteraction, decarbonization, as example, as something to go for and invest to and really bring the benefit of space and also revenues into the system. Thank you very much. With this, I would like to go to what I think is the most vertical person maybe on the table, Mr. Fidi. You have a background in various verticals, and we're interested really to see what view of you is on the big topics to come.
Thank you very much, and thanks also for the invitation. So I think currently it's quite a tough market. I think we described it already in the round. I mean, we are facing quite high interest rates. Yeah, so we are facing quite high salary raises, and we have to deal with that. I think we are, from the talent point of view, where I agree fully with you, we are really on the forefront of the people we are currently having in Europe. And I think this is really one of the big important assets which we can really use, even if maybe the funding is lower than in other countries. But that's very important, and I also agree on the topic of public relations and selling. Yeah, I think where we are not doing a good job. I think this is really something which we need to increase heavily. What I also would like to foster a bit is the European independence. So we currently have seen around, in 2020, around 1 trillion chips sold in the world. Out of that, we had around 10% from Europe. Which makes it really difficult. And when we look into things which are needed with respect to the technology to bring up the products which we need in the future, be it high performance processing, really allowing us to process certain data before transmission, since the transmission infrastructure is limited currently, even if that will increase significantly. So I think we really have to be very clever and invest in the right technology. Bringing that back to Europe, I think with respect to the complete topic of automation, this is possible, yeah, because I think the reasons why we transferred certain technologies into other countries, I think is gone, and we could really bring that back, which is really important for the whole independence there. And on the other hand side, what we are also seeing is we currently are seeing, especially in space, but also in other areas, a big wave of retirement. So we really have to invest in talents of the future more and more to really have people available who are having a lot of experience in space and are able to cope with the current digitalization and the related challenges in technology and products, which is very important. Also with respect to space as a service, I think this is quite some way to go. A big market from us, for example, is in US. US is there one step further, and I think this is not a topic really of the funding. It's really a topic of how we can incentivize people to really do startups, to really push technology, to really move the things forward. And I think that we can do a better job also with respect to marketing and sales, which is there very important. But I think there is a lot of current liquidity in the market. Yeah, we see it now with the COVID recovery fund. We see it with the money which was put into the industry via COVID. And I think we have to really use that wisely. And we currently see that there is a lot of activities ongoing on the service providing part, which is the launch infrastructure, for example, to really make that in Europe available, and also available in in a commercial favor. I think this is also where ECSECO can help a lot with respect to bringing the parties together, providing the data, really bringing this data to the people that they really see that there is a case for investment. Also currently, I think what was mentioned before, the commercial LEO station, which is currently a big topic in the US with a lot of players, where we are working quite tightly in that environment, is currently a question: is it commercial viable? Is there a case to invest? What is Europe's position in that? I think because that can foster, in addition, the market, which is very, very important. With respect to what we have heard before on the risk side, I think it's not only the topic of the funding and the topic of the sales, I think it's also the topic of the risk we are taking. And one of the big topics, for example, that SpaceX did, it took a lot of risk and a lot of failures, which currently is not very, very popular in the European industry, and it's really hard to really show the reliability and the environment, and there needs to be a certain way of having lean standards and a lean environment where we can really foster this kind of innovation and this kind of mentality also to fail. I think this is quite important in addition, and I think where ECSECO can help a lot with SPI is really to foster also the access to the related resources. So there are different kind of resources available, be it RF bandwidth or be it other topics, and really to ensure that this is there for the different industry verticals to use. I think is very important. It's not only mining, I think, which is important. I think there is also a lot of other resources which are really important to be secured and ensured for a certain environment to really foster the market. So this is, I think, the last point I wanted to make on that, that this is really important to have that available. Thank you.
Thank you very much. So, message here, we have the talent in Europe. You highlighted European autonomy is key, and you made the point on the chipsets, and this we see also in space, and you see it in automotive. And as our first speaker, you also raised the question whether the commercial LEO may be an environment to foster industry and the market. I think I would like to close this first round, and we'll have another half an hour or 20 minutes to go a bit into where ECSECO can help. But I would really like to read, and I hope I can do justice to Mr. Chris McLaughlin from OneWeb, to read the statement that he provided us. So I'm reading on his behalf what he sent us this morning, as he couldn't join. May I begin with a sincere apology for not being able to attend this important event in European-wide space industry evolution. Commercial demands meant that I must unexpectedly be in London, but my thoughts are very much with all at the launch event of the European Centre for Space Economy and Commerce. Why? Put simply, the global space industry is at an inflection point. We've heard that before today. With traditional models of business being challenged by new entrants, using new technology to access space at reduced cost, and to deliver an ever wider range of services, including communications and local resilience, climate change monitoring, and defensive situation awareness. The challenges to society are many, and the peaceful use of the space commons represents a major opportunity for all who would see human advancement as a key to progress. I had hoped to share views with the distinguished panel on the space economy and commerce at large, and on the challenge ahead for Europe in particular. To look at the further development of the European sector, and of course, to look at the critical role of ECSECO to guide thinking and evolve winning approaches to a complex and fast-moving sector. So I may begin stating the obvious. There's never been business as usual in the space sector. By definitions, the talents of multiple countries and their collective pooling of resource and experience are required to compete effectively with state space powers, most notably US, China, and Russia, and increasingly India. In Europe, the talent exists, and has been demonstrated for decades. But in a hybrid family of nations with such diverse histories, there are always tensions, and this can lead to discord. But that, of course, allows others to succeed at our expense. Such pathways lead to delay and to losing not just a race, but a gold medal winning series through lack of commonality and misdirected determination, perhaps through a national prism. ESA's Director General, Josef Aschbacher, is to be highly commended alongside Jean-Jacques Tortora for creating a platform to bring space professionals together to grow the European space sector. Scientists, engineers, regulatory specialists, and of course, entrepreneurial and sovereign finance will be essential to build a successful space ecosystem. Cooperation is key within a wider Europe, conveniently defined as ESA members, if it is to play a successful part in this industrial age. The best input of private sector, academia, international organizations, and public institutions must be drawn upon in an interdisciplinary way, with winning significant share and delivering credible capability as a goal. But what delivers this? I would argue delivery is judged by the creation of a self-sustaining pan-European organism capable of flexibility, creativity, and cost awareness, a creature not unlike ESA. And this is where the strength lies. ECSECO can assist the path to prominence for Europe, weaving multiple talents to channel the best and brightest input for it to drive member contributions to timely and effective outputs, putting a pan-European space industry firmly in the top tier of spacefaring nations to ensure European-wide benefits for the commercialization of the space commons is a true goal. OneWeb is an example of the evolving future model. We are multinational in ownership with India, France, UK, Japan, South Korea, and even a smaller US investment. I would note that France, through Eutelsat, is the second largest shareholder in OneWeb after India. And yes, we were recovered from a Chapter 11 process by the high-profile intervention of the UK government and the Bharti Group, but that was the securing of opportunity phase with a $1 billion new equity bid, and it was open to others to bid at the time. I think this is an interesting statement here. Since November 2020, OneWeb has attracted a further 1.7 billion of equity, has no debt, successfully launched 13 missions, and delivered 428 satellites into orbit, approximately 70% of our Generation 1 fleet. We are building out our global network of about 48 ground stations and obtaining the necessary market access permission. We were on track until the Ukraine tragedy to complete our Generation 1 network, with the last of 5 scheduled launches this month. We are delayed, but have taken steps internationally to secure the necessary launch capability to complete the network by mid-23. How did we do it? The regulatory LEO spectrum filings, for which we hold ITU priority globally, are from France and the UK. The satellites are built by Airbus, originating at SmallSats in Guildford, UK, progressing to full design in Toulouse before being manufactured in a joint venture with Airbus in a dedicated factory in Florida. The supply chain is global. Yes, despite COVID and geopolitical instability, we can still manufacture 2 satellites a day at a cost around 1.3 million each. Our enviable and exceptional launch program until March this year, and Russia's intervention in the use of Roscosmos Soyuz launcher from Baikonur Cosmodrome, was delivered by Arianespace. They have been a positive partner from our beginnings, and their experience is much valued. We are active with ESA and its Sunrise program in Generation 2 design thinking, we are already engaged with European innovators. In short, OneWeb has woven the best of Europe into a successful new low Earth orbit satellite company, one of only 2 in the world. We already offer services from the North Pole down to 50 degrees latitude. We are physically, geographically, mentally, and by choice, a global and European company. There are numerous challenges for the European space sector in the world moving fast, subject to political impact and demanding a very significant capital input. The sector requires long-term investment to grow a new industrial age, and this is hard to accommodate given the depth of USA risk capital availability and of sovereign national space programs. Europe needs access to space through sustained finance. But it also needs launch capability at affordable prices. It will need reusable launchers, both on environmental and economic grounds. For example, SpaceX in the US has just used a refurbished first stage for the 13th time. And it will need an openness to public-private sector partnership that cross multiple national boundaries. It needs an open door to innovation and opportunity. This, of necessity, extends the concept of Europe beyond a defined member state grouping to a wider of like-mind approach. A bit like Eurovision, but without the songs, dance routines, and dressing up, but then again. There are critical challenges to essential modern state capabilities that require the resilience of space-based delivery, including Earth observation, positioning, navigation and timing, space situational awareness, space science and exploration. The challenges will get harder and more numerous as other sectors deploy nationally directed capability. A positive, thoughtful regulatory environment will be essential for Europe in its widest sense to prosper. That will require international cooperation through the ITU and UN. We will recognize that innovation doesn't stand still. Our e-connected world requires multiple checks and balances, but these must not strangle creation. Society depends on it for progress, employment, security, functionality, and indeed, happiness. In driving a new approach to Europe's space growth, OneWeb supports the aims and ideals of ECSECO, congratulates ESA on this powerful step forward, and welcomes this powerful bridge to further understanding across the European-wide space community. Voila. I hope I did justice to quite a detailed contribution, and I'm happy that we had this with us today, although only indirectly, please.
May I just react to a couple of points that were just touched upon, because they were really interesting, and I cut a bit short before. So we were talking about creating an internal European space market and establishing a real European supply chain. And I think that governments, just as investors, have a critical role to play here. So first of all, I think that governments can support this by either, and this has been touched upon before by Monsieur Le Maire, actually, Le Maître, that space research funding is one way to do it, but I think it's also in government's responsibility and space agencies' responsibilities to position as customers of space startups. I think this is very key component. On the investment or investor side of things, it is our responsibility to invest into European startups that have fully European supply chains. Just to give one example, Reflex Aerospace is a company that we co-founded actually as a fund because we saw the necessity of Europe having access to small satellites, not CubeSats, but small sats in the category of 250 to 500 kilogram, because today there is literally no one doing those satellites at new space prices. So I think this is a way how hand in hand, governments and investors can work on this. Then Monsieur Lemaitre and also Mr. Fidi, I think they touched upon space as a service versus investing into public infrastructure. I believe that we really need to focus on both. I believe that over the past couple of years, a lot of focus has been on the infrastructure side, but this also needs to continue because without infrastructure, you cannot have services. I think on the space-based services side of things, the focus really needs to be on user uptake now. And therefore, and I always urge companies to really get a very, very good understanding of the market environment that they're in, to really understand what are my prospects' real problems, how can I address them, and where can I actually really add value. And then one thing that where I always shy away a little bit is when they start talking about how much market education there is to be done, because that usually means that the way to commercialization is very far ahead. So I think that what companies really need to do in this respect when it comes to commercialization of applications, it's very important that they are able to bridge this valley or this death valley between demonstration and commercialization, so actual operations. Then another topic that we all touched upon was security and enhanced by regulation. I think it is very important, and this could also be a role for ECSECO, is that we lobby for a multilateral legal framework, because we're currently working with laws that date from the 70s. So I think there is a bit of a catch-up to do here when it comes to debris monitoring, tracking, collision avoidance, debris removal. So I see a lot of startups that are working in those areas, but very much their business model also often depends on progress on the regulation side. I also believe that it will be very key when putting in place those new regulations that regulators should always take into account industry challenges and constraints in order not to over-regulate. So I think there's a fine balance to strike here in order to really put in place a framework that benefits the industry as well. Then the last topic that we touched upon, which was really interesting, was verticalization as a bridge between terrestrial industries and space technologies. And I think that here people will realize more and more, or I do I do hope they will, that we are currently experiencing a real industry shift as we have experienced it with the internet industry, or when you think back of to the 1920s, to the aviation industry. So I think that the only real use cases for the internet industry back in the days, when you think of ARPANET, for instance, was very much just to have an attack-proof communications network to facilitate communication between research centers. And this was basically what is today, that was the very beginning of what we have today in Silicon Valley. If you think back to the aviation industry in the 1920s, the only commercial use case there was for planes was to deliver mail. And I like to compare this to the space industry, where today we have no idea what the business cases will be in 20, 30 years, but it's starting now. And there are already viable business cases today, but there is a lot to do to really support them and make very successful businesses out of them in Europe. And then I think, I think verticalization itself will happen in a number of industries. I do believe that telecommunications will be a main driver and taker for the new types of technologies. I think that satellite internet has proven, and satellite internet through constellations have proven as the backup solution whenever terrestrial networks become military targets. I think that has been demonstrated quite clearly. Automotive, I think, will also be an industry that will rely on satellite internet at some point. It is an enabler for autonomous driving. Your car fleets can be updated on the software side of things. Or basically, automotive stakeholders will be able to update their software across their entire fleets. So I think that these are just a number of examples of terrestrial industries that will see a value in using space technology. So in that sense, I fully agree that we are at an inflection point and there are so many opportunities, but we also need to do something to promote the use of space, and that's another role that I see for ECSECO.
Thank you very much. Very, very relevant. I like the Death Valley between the demonstration and getting to true commercialization. It's not just about the technology and demonstrating it, it's really developing services and the market to a stage where it really becomes sustainable. Thank you for the two examples on the verticalization, telecommunications, automotive. And I'm sure we will discover others, like in the internet age, as you said. Everybody was looking for the killer application. It never came, and much more happened. And I think we are not dissimilar here. I would like to use the last 15 minutes to give each of our other panelists 5 minutes to underline specifically where you think ECSECO can help, and maybe we start in the reverse order, and we start with the verticalization.
Thank you very much. Just some comments. Yeah, the Death Valley. Yeah, we also had that, and I have to say a big thank you to ESA. Yeah, because the ESA people are always there to help. Yeah. No matter when you call them, yeah, and this was really a big help on our side as well when we started with space, and we're coming from automotive industry, and it's really tough to get from a demonstrator to a full qualified ECSS system, yeah. This was very, very helpful. So on this verticalization, or in general, I think where ECSECO can help a lot, yeah, is on the one hand side for sure to bring the interest group together. So we for example have different verticals. Yeah, we are working a lot in autonomy, autonomous systems, be it on the road or off the road. But also be it in wind power plant industry and so on. And for example, in Germany, the wind power plants all have a satellite data link. Yeah. And I think this is a certain thing which is quite interesting, and this will be fostered more and more. And to also add to your topic of wireless updates of the car, yeah. So there will be in real-time data processed in the future between the different cars. So this is wherever I drive and there is an accident, I will know it, the car will already know it, the car will take the action. And this is really how we are seeing this really coming up, and this will be in all kind of infrastructure, be it in trains, be it in cars. And things like that. And I think this is really something where the satellite constellations will help a lot, providing low latency, real-time services. And I think it will be really, really interesting on how this can be ensured that you run streaming applications in parallel to real-time safety critical data. And this is some things where we were also working together with your colleagues from Reflex on certain things on how we could ensure that, and I think this is really interesting. And ECSECO would be, for example, one group bringing this interests group together to really discuss and foster this kind of applications, the related data which is needed to really show that there is a market, but also the data which is needed to really provide it to the different agencies or governmental organization or insurance companies, really helping there to provide the infrastructure. Because what we're currently seeing in autonomous driving is really tough to have this environment orchestrated between the insurance companies, the government, the different kind of regulations, and ensure that there is an environment allowing these kind of services. I think another topic which has been addressed today, which I was also discussing about the talents and the retirement of certain generations, I think it can help really a lot to inspire people to go into space, to really help also on the educational side, which is really, really important. So currently a lot of companies are struggling not in getting the opportunities, they are struggling on executing the opportunities, yeah. But therefore you really need to have very, very good talents with a lot of industry experience, and this is, I think, very important, where ECSECO can play a big role also in that environment, and to inspire the people more, because I think with respect, when we look into US, yeah, I mean, there are space centers everywhere that people can go into, different kind of museums where they see all kind of space environment. They have training centers to become, to live like an astronaut for people, where they are bringing the people or the school or from the school into the centers where they can really experience space. And I think that we can do way more in really inspiring the people. That goes back to PR and then sales as well. And then I think one big topic is really identifying also the gaps in standards and to ensure compliance, yeah, to these regulations, to these standards. And I think this is important, because these standards really need to become lean. They really need to become easily to access, or have to easily be accessible. And I think this is very important to ensure that we are really fostering the economy in that direction. Thank you.
Thank you very much. I think for the sake of time, I would ask you to stick to 5 minutes. You did, just underlining it. And I think the bringing together the verticals, the ecosystem, help that process is clearly something that I think is at the core of what ECSECO can do. I would pass the floor now to Monsieur Dontriot, please.
Thank you. So we'll try to be very quick indeed. Based on the discussions we had so far, I see two main axes for ECSECO to work in and to support indeed the thoughts for the benefits of European space sector. The first one is definitely to support indeed the evaluation of the market trends, the added value which can be brought by space-based solutions towards the different actors and need on the commercial and institutional side. It's definitely something which is, I think, absolutely necessary for supporting indeed and sustain the economic model, which is of key and paramount importance for space industry. The second axis is the regulation and the articulation between institutional bodies and private bodies, and specifically private investment. We touched that several times during the discussions. We have addressed indeed the issue about accessibility to the data, and that's specifically true if we go towards the verticalization. What verticalization can also mean some closing of the assets along the value chain. So we have to ensure, and here institutions can help in securing access to the different steps of the value chain, and so that's for the access, and also the quality. I would just insist here that something which is not so much in the economical model, but it's very important to ensure that, specifically for the Earth observation, that new space way of working doesn't mean decrease of quality. I think it's important specifically for the added value services, because the images are indeed like the grapes for the winemakers, and we know that we cannot make good wines without good grapes, and it's the same applies for downstream services. if the data and if the images, the raw material is not at the right quality level, we can go in very, very disappointing ways. So that's something on which I think also there is a need for articulating the role of institutions with the one of the private bodies.
Thank you very much. Market trends was mentioned before to demonstrate the added value for institutional and commercial markets and link between public and private side in many ways, including ensuring the quality of the product. Very clear. So with this, I believe we go to Mr. Albino. Professor Albino, please.
Well, I think ECSECO can be a great opportunity for the European space ecosystem. I try to focus a few points. The first, we start from the topic of startups, because when we have a sector that is fast growing, like space sector or space ecosystem, then you have a technology and organization that are recombined in a different ways, and we don't know exactly where and how the value is created. So we have the physical value chain, the virtual value chain, and the value can be shared in a different way. So it is not easy. That's the reason, because startups is a very complex process, and the dead valley is very huge in this case. And of course, we have opportunity also for large companies, because we think in terms of startups, but in the ecosystem, we have also large companies that can get benefit because they can understand where the value is created, and they can get benefit through acquisitions of startups. ECSECO can be useful because in this case, we see that the ecosystem is subject to a process of complexification. So when you have complexification, you have to understand the complexity. And you can't understand the complexity only looking at technology or engineering. You need to understand what is the interaction with the context, with the social acceptation of technology and business. And then we need a kind of interdisciplinarity that is in the genes of the ECSECO. I think that also the great knowledge and experience of ESA can be codified and translated by ECSECO, especially looking at the business model, looking how heterogeneous is the ecosystem, and so what could be the need in terms of new institutions for the ecosystem. So I think that ECSECO can be very important in the creating value from the knowledge of ESA and of the whole ecosystem. Other 2 points. First is partnership. I think that ECSECO can support the creation of partnership, or network of partnership with European and non-European institutions, and so can contribute to what we know it's space diplomacy that is really important now. But we can create also partnership within the ESA world. I mean, with ESA labs, for instance, when we have ESA labs that have some experience or are doing something in terms of space economy and commerce. So this could be another effective network. I will not to academia, so I can just recommend few classical, traditional behavior. The first is, as been mentioned, the collaborative research. But I want to mention the opportunity to open positions, temporary positions, also for professors, for visiting scholars, for visiting professors, because the problem of talents, we mentioned the problem of talents, ECSECO can contribute to create a community of experts that can be later part of business or part of academia or part of the institutions. And that they are expert in terms of interdisciplinarity, in terms of a holistic vision of the system. And last but not least, of course, all collaboration between ECSECO and the university system can be used also to support European institutions like European Union Commission or European Parliament on the Committee of Regions, because, of course, these kind of institutions need strongly to be supported by think tank or organizations that are able to decodify the complexity of the reality. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Understanding the complexity of startups in their not only technology component, also in the context. Yes, I think we still don't have a definition of what the startups in the new space is as a first step. Huh? It's an interesting, interesting task. Oh, there are 3 definitions or 5. And interesting, you say this as a professor, create the community of experts, interdisciplinary, and ultimately with the collaborative research and that know-how support other institutions. Yeah, very, very, very complementary also to what we've heard so far. I would like to conclude with Mr. Lemaitre, please.
Thank you again. Perhaps a few, I wouldn't say recommendation to ECSECO, but what I would expect ECSECO to be or not to be actually. I would strongly recommend that ECSECO defines very clearly what ECSECO is going to talk about. And let me illustrate that with one example. Is the technician that is installing a parabolic antenna on your balcony part of the space economy or not? I doubt, for me it's not, but we can have other views. Nonetheless, and it's linked to my first comment, know what you are talking about, but also fight against the delusion, fantasies that are surrounding what we call space economy. And we see nearly every month a report from think tanks or from prominent banks or from investors talking about huge growth rate in space and taking into their perimeter of calculation Uber or even Tinder because they are using geolocalized services. I mean, this is completely crazy, and you are not measuring anything. So, recommendation is really define clearly what we are measuring, what we are talking about, and also be conscious that in measuring space economy there is also today, for me, a lot of I would call ideological biases. Obviously, measuring space economy in general, it's healthy. I mean, it's based on big public investment, so it's healthy to see where your money goes and what is the usefulness. But on the other hand, we also are talking about space economy as a kind of a way to support this dream that a space economy will develop, will arise, based mostly on private investment and to answer a private demand. Perhaps this will happen in the long-term future, but this is not existing today. So it's a dream, and I have a bit the impression that this mantra that we hear very often and too often for me that space must become commercial. This is kind of a delusion. First of all, because in Europe in particular, space is today much more commercial than anywhere else in the world. So I will not again repeat our success in export, but we are also making today roughly 40% of our turnover on commercial open market. So we are commercial. There is, I mean, this question of space must become commercial is a bit stupid actually, and this is actually not helping to continue to have clever, efficient political action to sustain the system as it is working today. So, and also, it's also hiding the fact that we are talking about space as a service space, but in the end, space is an infrastructure. whether you buy it as a service, but in the end it's based on an infrastructure. And as an infrastructure, it has the same characteristic as other infrastructure, roads and bridges, telecommunication networks, so it's based on big investments. These are infrastructure that are lasting years and have a long development time. They are complex and expensive to acquire and to operate, and we should keep that in mind. So perhaps a few what I would like ECSECO to do in the future. It's having a reflection about what kind of regulatory measure could be put in place to improve or to sustain and to encourage the use of space. For instance, do we need a kind of a certification of data coming from the Copernicus program? I do believe so, but probably Mark is better positioned than I am. Do we need regulation to support the emergence of a space traffic management market service? I also do believe that. And perhaps what might be interesting is also to benchmark what's happening in the US to support this the space sector, but not only in the US. I'm also thinking about what's happening in India and in South Korea, who have recently opened their space sector to private activity. So perhaps it's worth investigating. So that's it for me. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Very timely and very real recommendations. So regulatory measures, maybe certification of data sources, space traffic management, market regulation. I like the benchmarking also what is done elsewhere in the US, India, South Korea. Very interesting. I think we managed to capture what we wanted to discuss today here. This was the very first discussion of a new forum to just start now. I think we would now go to the final part, and I thank you very much for your contributions and for coming here. We'd like to come maybe to the final part, which will be the signature of the MOU. I understand we will disconnect for a moment the video. The audience, please stay connected. We will be back in a second as we prepare just the setup for the signature. So we'll be very short and we'll be back in a minute. Thank you.
So, good afternoon, everyone. We are back again, but in a different configuration. So what we're doing now is we're signing this Memorandum of Understanding between the European Space Policy Institute and the European Space Agency. European Space Agency represented by myself, and of course the European Space Policy Institute represented kindly by the Treasurer, if I understand correctly, of ESPI, on behalf of Jean-Jacques Tortora. So this agreement really signifies the kickoff and the start of ECSECO, which we have discussed earlier. And personally, I'm just very happy to put ink on the paper, because this was an undertaking which we prepared for several months. I'm very happy that commercialization and economic aspects are getting much more attention within the European space context, and this activity of ECSECO at ESPI, supported by us at the European Space Agency, for me is a highlight of the year, and certainly also a highlight for Austria, where this will be hosted, and I'm really looking forward to this signature event. But I'd like to hand over, please, to you.
Thank you, Mr. Aschbacher. Also on my side, let me say at the beginning how deeply honored I feel to represent the European Space Policy Institute on this very special occasion and to, of course, sign the Memorandum of Understanding. We at ESPI have the great privilege to host the European Center for Space, Economy and Commerce. I believe that this newly created center will bring together the European space community and will further develop European space economy and commerce. Finally, at the very end, it is my great pleasure to inform you that the application for membership in ECSECO is now finally and officially open. We kindly invite you to go to www.execo.org and find out more. Thank you very much.
And now we sign.
Now we sign. Yeah.
Congratulations.
Thank you very much.
And here are the signed copies. And here are the signed copies for the record. And this really starts a new era of space economy and commerce. Thank you very much. We should take a picture with all the